chat.
I'm Caitlin, and I'm doing psychological lens, specifically war psychology.
I'm Sanjana, and I'm doing the historical lens.
I'm Dominic, and I'm also doing the historical lens.
So I'd like to start us off with a question. What was the long-term effect of the war on the author's psychology, and how has it affected his view of the world today? How has it changed his expectations of the future?
He definitely learned a lot during the war, like how it was and how different it was during the war and at the front, and then back home when he got his first peacetime. So he definitely has different experiences, and he put that into retrospect, and he started thinking what he would like to just stay with his comrades at the front, or just stay with his ill mom and sister and dad and at the house. So he's kind of like conflicted about what to do about Paul.
Yeah, I agree with Sanjana. I think that war changes people, and not for the better, because of how much you see, like, especially like at the front. There's a lot of like death, and just it really can scar a person, and then having to go back home to an ill family. There's a lot, and I think that's a hard decision to decide. Do you want to stay with like your comrades, like you said, or go help your family? And I wouldn't be able to make that decision.
Not entirely sure that answers the question. That's
Oh, are you
more
talking
so.
about the author?
Yeah, we're talking about the author himself and what he went through, and not the characters. I do believe that he created Paul off of his own experiences, but specifically, how did the war for Remarque himself change his psychology and affect how he viewed the world, not only during that time, but also for his future?
So I answered for Paul, and I feel like they're kind of the same person, Remarque and Paul. That's why I was talking about Paul. But then for Remarque, he left Germany because of his book and how he thought about the war, how he felt about it. And I think it's because of the experiences and how he wanted to say everything truthfully. That's why he left Germany and like really never came back to the war, because of how he felt.
And this was a very controversial book in Germany, because it depicted the German soldiers and the whole government just not really taking care of their soldiers and sending them on pretty much suicide missions, even though, like, at the beginning, obviously they didn't know if they were going to win or lose, but once it got more clear that they were losing the war, they still sent their soldiers off. They still sent these 19-year-old boys off into battle when they knew there was a slim chance of them coming back. Like, I feel like Remarque telling and showing us that truth and hardship that they actually had to go through really opens people's eyes to the hard truth of war and how it affects the soldiers, and not just like the higher ranking officers or like the older men, but it's taking away our youth.
Do you have anything to add?
No, I agree with what both of you guys said. I don't really have much to add to that.
In a way, we kind of already answered this, like, partly, but I did want to ask another question. Why was it important for Remarque to present his story the way he did? Why was it important to write the truth about the war and express how badly it was for the German soldiers on the German front? At the beginning of the story, in the prologue, he writes, "This book is to be neither an accusation nor a confession, and least of all an adventure. For death is not an adventure to those who stand face to face with it. It will try simply to tell of a generation of men, even though they may have escaped shells, were destroyed by the war." So why do you think it was important for Marque to present his story this way instead of fictionally?
Definitely the way he describes the experiences he went through, he describes it as mostly terrified. Like during the shell attacks, he says something like, "We have neither flesh nor muscles any longer. We dare not look at one another for fear of some miscalculable thing. So we shut our teeth and perhaps we will come through it." He has like a slim chance of hope that they will all survive, but he tries his best to get through each day. And he really loves his comrades. He makes that very clear throughout the book. And I just think he wanted to express the brothership he has with his comrades and the intense experiences he went through during the war, and didn't want to leave out anything. Just lie about it.
Yeah, I think when you like go through such a hard time like that with like certain people, and you form this like bond with these people that's like, it's almost like unbreakable bond, because you've done like all these like horrific things with these people, and like you've seen horrific things with these people. And that's why I feel like it was so important for him to share this story.
I think it was also important for him to bring light to the truth of what was happening, because there were 18, 19-year-old boys enlisting in the army because of all of the heroic and like amazing deeds that they hear coming back to them from the war. But once you get there, it's nothing like that. So the propaganda that the government was giving out was in capturing these teenage boys to fight for their country in the war, when they thought they would only be out for a few weeks, or it wasn't that bad, or they could do something heroic for their country, when in reality it was terrifying. It was horror. There was horror, and you watched your comrades die right in front of you. On page 18, it says, "We are the Iron Youth. Iron Youth, we are none of us more than 20 years old, but young youth, that is long gone, we are old folk." So even though they are still 19, the second they enlisted in the war, their childhood, their innocence, their pretty much life just went downhill. It's not there anymore. They feel torn away from their families, and their future is a big blur. Even at 19, they feel like they are not the Iron Youth everyone calls them. They have lost their innocence by the horrors they have witnessed on the front. They now know the evil that lives in the world and cannot look back from this. Before, they could have gone through life clueless or wondering, but now that there is no forgetting the loss of life they have witnessed and the lifeless bodies and that paint the battlefield. Their friends and comrades who won't make it home to their families have broken down their humanity, and they will never return to the life they left. The author's choice to call the young men who are enlisted the Iron Youth really drives the reader to feel the young men are extremely tough, like iron. However, it is a facade used to cover up the sadness that the sadness and depression that is young men devoting their lives to a bloodbath, and pretty much just suicide. And war is not something that young men who haven't experienced enough in life, or even most of them haven't even had created their own family yet. Like, one of them had a wife and kids on the farm, but most of them were dreaming about going back home and meeting a girl. Like, that's all they wanted to do.
They didn't get to live their life.
Yeah, but instead they went off to war and died.
I think looking at this through a historical lens, back then, all that people saw about young men were that they should be drafted into the war. They never really thought, oh, what if we send them to college and get them an education and then get them a job? They're like, no, if they're fit and they're young, just send them off to war.
Yeah, they weren't thinking about how they are as the youth coming up into the world, they figured, oh, young, fresh blood, more like new eyes, fresh eyes, fresh feet. Like, we can train them into strong soldiers
Yeah.
at a young age. But the thing is that the young boys in that society was their future. And if they threw them all to suicide on the battlefield, then they had no future. They had no possible way to live on if they didn't make it home. And even if they did, like he said at the beginning, they still didn't really survive the war because it changed them. They could never go back to the life they left.
I'm trying to look for this page. At the end, when everyone dies, he says he's the last of his class of 9, and like he dies at the end too. And I just feel maybe don't send everyone. Like, why was that the destiny that the men had thought? Like, why send all young men to the war? Why not save some of them for a good education and lead on the generation?
That
That's
kind
just
of
what I wondered.
that kind of segues into my next question. But did you guys have any questions?
I could ask a question, but it might just kind of like bring it a little bit off topic. If you want to ask, keep going with yours. If you guys into the topic still.
Okay. So going off of what you said, in the beginning we learned that their high school teacher convinces them to enlist in the army. What causes the teacher to seek out the boys? What was in it for him, and why was he so adamant about fighting for your country but didn't enlist himself? And what was in it for the boys?
I think that the teacher saw all of the like propaganda that was, and like propaganda was obviously like fake, like you were saying. So he just thought to himself like, what a good time to like tell all these young children not children, but these boys to enlist in the army. And if they're all gonna enlist, then why should I enlist if there's gonna be all these?
And I think it's just a general view of everybody. Like, all the past generations are just like, we have to fight for our country, we have to protect our country. And they just drove that into every kid. And then, yeah, that's what the young men thought their destiny was. And that's just what they thought they would have to do in the future. So they didn't really think about what they could do other than that.
Yeah, I think I'm not really sure what the teacher gained from convincing the boys to join, but I think one of the factors that the boys probably, like, that was for them enlisting was that maybe they thought, like, because of the propaganda that, oh, if I enlist, I could become a war hero, I could, like, get medals for, like, valor and honor, and I would be seen as, like, honorable when I come home and not a coward who ran away from the war or something. Because even the women back then used to be like, oh, why aren't you in the war? Like, you're a healthy young man, why are you here and not over there fighting? And so I feel like that also was a factor for them enlisting. It was a lot of outside pressure.
I get what you're saying, like, because you think about it, like, all of these young teenagers were just gone. So if you were one of the teenagers